Welcome back to Dark Domain, where the shadows never sleep. Tonight, we've got 3 chilling stories that will make you question what's lurking just out of sight. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button, because the more likes, the deeper we go into the darkness. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it might be wise to do so, before the whispers decide to pay you a visit. Now, before we dive in, here's a question for you. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received? Drop it in the comments and who knows, it might just help someone else make it through the night. Underneath. I never planned to stay in Birmingham, Alabama longer than a few weeks. I was just passing through trying to escape a life that had become too complicated. After my divorce, I quit my job as a construction foreman in Chicago, packed up what little I had left, and drove south, away from everything that reminded me of the life I used to have. Birmingham wasn't my final destination. It was just a stop along the way to somewhere better, I hoped. The apartment I rented was cheap, and it showed. The kind of place where neighbors kept to themselves. The parking lot was filled with cars that hadn't moved in weeks, and the hallway lights flickered every so often. The landlord, an old guy named Ralph, gave me a brief tour, pointing out the laundry room and mentioning a leaky roof. "Place ain't much, but it's quiet," he said. And that's what I needed. Quiet. The wallpaper was peeling at the corners, the floors creaked with every step, and the plumbing groaned whenever I turned on the sink. But for $500 a month, I wasn't going to complain. It didn't matter anyway. I wasn't planning on staying long enough for it to bother me. Then, a few days in, I noticed the scratching. At first, I brushed it off. I assumed it was rats or squirrels. The building was old, and Ralph didn't seem like the kind of guy who handled complaints quickly. The scratching would start around midnight, faint at first, coming from somewhere beneath the floor. It wasn't the random scurrying of small feet. It was slower, more deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. I told myself it was nothing, just the building settling. But every night it got a little louder, a little closer. One night, after I'd had a couple of beers and the noise was louder than ever, I decided to do something about it. Armed with a flashlight and the crowbar I kept in my closet, left over from my days in construction, I pulled up the loose floorboards beneath my bed. The smell hit me first, musty, like wet wood and old dust. Shining the light into the crawl space beneath the floor, I saw nothing at first, just darkness. Then I noticed the scratches. Deep, jagged lines cut into the wooden beams like someone, or something, had clawed at them. My stomach tightened. I dropped the floorboards back into place and tried to push the image out of my mind. Maybe they had been there for years, long before I moved in. Maybe it was nothing. But from that night on, the scratching wasn't something I could ignore anymore. I started sleeping with the lights on. I'd leave the TV playing old reruns for background noise, trying to drown out the sound of nails on wood. I told myself it was stress, or my imagination, or maybe a side effect of too much late-night beer. But the scratching kept coming back, louder each time, until it wasn't just under the bed, it was in the walls, following me from room to room. One night I was dozing off on the couch, an old baseball game playing softly on the TV, when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't beneath me. It was in the hallway, right outside my front door. My heart pounded, and my hand instinctively reached for the crowbar leaning against the wall. I stood up, listening. The scratching was steady, rhythmic, like someone dragging something sharp across the other side of the door. I hesitated for a moment, then walked slowly toward the door. Taking a deep breath, I looked through the peephole. Nothing, just the dimly lit hallway. I opened the door cautiously. The hallway stretched out into the shadows, empty and silent. But the scratching didn't stop. It was inside the walls now, louder than ever, like it was surrounding me. I closed the door and locked it, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. The next morning, I decided to talk to Ralph. I wasn't sure what I expected. A quick fix, maybe some reassurance. But when I mentioned the scratching, his face changed. "You're in 304, right?" he asked, avoiding my gaze. Yeah, why? He shifted uncomfortably. That unit, some tenants have mentioned noises before. Old building like this, it carries sounds, probably just pipes or settling. Pipes don't leave scratches under the floorboards, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed. Look, I can have someone take a look, but I can't promise anything. These walls are old and sounds travel in strange ways. I left his office feeling more unsettled than before. It seemed like he knew more than he was letting on. That night, I decided to investigate further. I wasn't going to run this time. I had run from my life, my marriage, my problems, but I wasn't running from this. I stayed awake, waiting. Just after midnight, the scratching started again. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound back to the bedroom. The floorboards near the closet seemed uneven, like they'd been disturbed. I pried them up, exposing another section of the crawl space. The smell was stronger here, earthy and damp. Shining the light inside, I noticed something shiny embedded in the dirt. I reached in and pulled out a small metal object. It was a key, old and rusted. Puzzled, I examined it. What was a key doing under my floorboards? As I held it, I heard a faint creaking sound from behind me. I turned quickly, but nothing was there. I decided to see where the key might fit. Searching the apartment, I found a small locked door at the back of the hallway closet, something I hadn't noticed before. The key fit perfectly. Opening the door, I found a narrow staircase leading downward. My pulse quickened. This didn't make any sense. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. Curiosity got the better of me. I descended the stairs cautiously, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, I found myself in a small room cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and discarded belongings. It looked like a forgotten storage space. As I moved the flashlight around, I noticed markings on the walls, tallies scratched into the plaster, hundreds of them. Papers scattered on a table caught my eye. They were letters, unsent, written by someone named Daniel. Reading through them, I realized Daniel had lived in my apartment years ago. His letters spoke of hearing noises, seeing shadows, feeling watched. He wrote about a hidden room where he felt compelled to spend his time, where the scratching was loudest. A chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from above. Startled, I dropped the papers. It sounded like the door had slammed shut. I rushed back up the stairs only to find the small door locked from the other side. Panic set in. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but the thick wood muffled my voice. My phone had no signal in the enclosed space. I was trapped. Taking a deep breath, I tried to think rationally. There had to be another way out. Returning to the room below, I searched for anything that could help. Behind a stack of boxes, I found a small window, dirty but intact. Peering through, I realized it led to the alley behind the building. Using the crowbar, I managed to pry the window open. It was a tight squeeze, but I climbed through, scraping my arms on the rough edges. I dropped down into the alley, breathing in the cool night air. I didn't go back for my belongings. I left the apartment that night and never returned. A few days later, I called Ralph to tell him I was terminating my lease. He didn't seem surprised. "Figures," he said. "Place ain't for everyone." I wanted to press him for more information, but decided it wasn't worth it. I just wanted to move on. I settled in a new town, far from Birmingham, trying to put the experience behind me. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that hidden room, the tallies on the wall, and Daniel's letters. I wonder how many others had found that room, or if anyone had ever found Daniel. In the end, I realized that running from my problems had only led me to new ones. Perhaps the scratching was a coincidence, or maybe it was the manifestation of my own unresolved issues. Either way, it forced me to confront the fact that I couldn't keep running. I started seeing a therapist to work through everything. The divorce, the anxiety, the lingering fears. It's helped. The nights are quieter now. I may never know what truly happened in that apartment, but I've learned that sometimes the things that haunt us are not ghosts or monsters, but the shadows of our own minds. The Charleston Haunting. My name is Mike Danner, and I've been a truck driver for 15 years. I've hauled loads across every stretch of highway this country has to offer. Most days are uneventful, just me, the open road, and the hum of the engine. But last month, something happened in Charleston, West Virginia that I can't shake from my mind. It started like any other day. I'd just finished a delivery in Pittsburgh and was heading south when my dispatcher, Dave, called with a new assignment. "Mike, I need you to make a pickup in Charleston," he said. "Charleston? That's a bit out of the way, isn't it?" I replied. "Yeah, but it's important. Client's request. Here's the address." He sent over the details and I punched the location into my GPS. The place was listed as an operational warehouse, though I'd never been there before. As I drove through the winding roads of West Virginia, the sky grew heavy with thick gray clouds. The radio sputtered with static, so I turned it off, left alone with the sound of rain pattering against the windshield. By the time I reached the outskirts of Charleston, dusk had settled in. The warehouse stood at the end of a narrow gravel road, flanked by dense woods on either side. It looked old, brick walls weathered by time, windows dark and boarded up. A faded sign hung crookedly above the entrance: Carter & Sons Storage. I frowned. This didn't look like any active warehouse I'd ever seen, but the lights above the loading dock flickered to life as I pulled in, casting an eerie glow over the puddles forming on the cracked asphalt. I parked the truck, grabbed my paperwork, and headed toward the door. A sense of unease settled over me, but I brushed it off. Just another odd job. The metal door creaked loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp and musty, carrying the scent of mold and something else I couldn't place. The overhead lights buzzed and flickered, illuminating rows of empty shelves stretching into the darkness. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed back to me. I checked my phone. No signal. Not unusual for these parts, but inconvenient. The instructions said someone would meet me inside to assist with the load. I waited a moment, listening to the silence. A soft scuffling sound caught my attention. "Anyone here?" I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. I walked deeper into the warehouse, my footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. The place felt abandoned, yet there were signs of recent activity. A set of fresh footprints marked the dusty floor, leading around a corner. I hesitated but decided to follow them. As I rounded the corner, I stopped short. In the middle of the aisle stood a large metal container, unlike any shipping crate I'd seen before. It was about the size of a small car, made of thick, riveted steel. Heavy chains wrapped around it multiple times, secured with old but sturdy padlocks. Oddly, the chains and locks seemed newer than the container itself, less corroded. The container's surface was etched with strange symbols, circles intersecting with lines, forming patterns that made my eyes feel funny if I stared too long. I approached cautiously, reaching out to touch one of the chains. It was cold to the touch, slick from the damp air. Just then, a faint thud sounded from within the container. I jerked my hand back. "Hello?" I called uncertainly. "Is someone in there?" Silence. I pressed my ear against the cool metal, holding my breath. For a moment, all I heard was the distant hum of the lights. Then a muffled scratching sound like nails scraping against steel. My heart began to pound. Was someone trapped inside? I looked around for tools, anything I could use to break the locks. But then a rational thought hit me. What if this was some kind of prank? Or worse, a trap? I stepped back, deciding it was time to leave and get help. As I turned to go, the overhead lights flickered violently before going out entirely, plunging the warehouse into darkness. "Great," I muttered, fumbling for my phone to use as a flashlight. A loud clang echoed behind me, the sound of metal striking metal. I spun around, the weak light from my phone barely piercing the darkness. The container stood as before, but the chains seemed to have shifted, some hanging loosely as if they'd been unraveled. Panic surged through me. Without another thought, I sprinted toward the entrance, the beam from my phone bouncing wildly. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of metal groaning, as if the container's lid was being pried open. I reached the door and yanked it hard. It wouldn't budge. "Come on," I shouted, throwing my weight against it. It was as if it had been locked from the outside. A whispering sound drifted through the air, indecipherable but growing louder. It seemed to come from all around me. Desperate, I searched for another exit. Spotting a faint light to my left, I raced toward it, weaving between shelves and dodging debris. I found a side door, rusted but slightly ajar. I shoved it open and burst out into the rain-soaked night. Cold air filled my lungs as I gulped it in, adrenaline propelling me toward my truck. I didn't look back. Jumping into the cab, hands trembling, I fumbled with the keys before starting the engine and pulling away, not daring to look back at the warehouse. The next morning, I called my dispatcher. "Dave, what the hell happened last night? That warehouse was abandoned and there was no one there." He paused. "What are you talking about, Mike? I didn't assign you any pickup last night." "What? You called me, gave me the address in Charleston." "Mike, I think you've been on the road too long. I didn't speak to you after you left Pittsburgh." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "But you sent me the address. Carter & Sons Storage." There was silence on the line. Then Dave spoke quietly. "Mike, that place burned down over 20 years ago. It's been condemned ever since." I pulled over to the side of the road, trying to make sense of it all. I checked my phone for the call logs and messages, but there was nothing from Dave since the previous day. Had I imagined it? No, that couldn't be. I was there. I felt the cold metal of the container, heard the sounds. I decided to dig deeper. Over the next few days, I researched Carter & Sons. I found old newspaper articles detailing a fire that had claimed the lives of several workers. Rumors swirled about illegal activities and unexplained occurrences leading up to the tragedy. One article mentioned a sealed container brought in shortly before the fire, a container said to be cursed, holding something the workers refused to speak about. I don't know what I encountered that night in Charleston. Maybe it was a residual haunting, a replay of past events, or perhaps something more sinister. All I know is that since then, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows flicker at the edge of my vision, and sometimes, when I'm alone on the road at night, I hear faint whispers over the hum of the engine. I've been a truck driver for 15 years and I've seen a lot of strange things, but nothing has unsettled me like that night at Carter & Sons Storage. Some doors once opened are hard to close, and some roads lead you places you might never return from. Whispers in the Pines. There are corners of Boise that time seems to have forgotten. Old neighborhoods nestled behind the bustling downtown, where ancient pines loom over cracked sidewalks, and shadows linger even at midday. I never had a reason to wander those silent streets, until the calls began. My name is Logan Pierce, a detective with the Boise Police Department. I've seen my share of darkness, homicides, missing persons, the senseless cruelties people inflict on one another. But nothing prepared me for what unfolded over the past month. It started with a body and spiraled into a mystery that still haunts me. The first call came on a crisp October morning. Darlene Foster, a woman in her late 30s, had been found dead in her home on Pinecrest Lane, a secluded street on the city's edge. From the moment I stepped into her house, I knew this was no ordinary crime scene. Darlene lay sprawled in her living room, her body marred by intricate cuts forming symbols and patterns across her skin. Circles interwoven with lines, shapes resembling ancient runes or scripts I'd never seen before. There were no signs of forced entry, no indications of a struggle. It was as if she had welcomed her killer. My partner, Joe Ramirez, and I scoured every inch of the house. The neighbors had nothing to offer, no strange noises, no unfamiliar visitors. Darlene lived alone, kept to herself. The forensic team couldn't trace the markings to any known language or code. Back at the station, I couldn't shake the image of those symbols. They felt deliberate, purposeful, as if conveying a message meant to be deciphered. I began sifting through databases, looking for similar cases, but nothing matched. 2 weeks later, another body surfaced. Robert Eastman, early 40s, lived just 3 streets over from Darlene. Same pristine home, same lack of evidence, and the same eerie markings etched into his flesh. The media whispered about a serial killer. The department felt the mounting pressure. Desperate for leads, I delved into the archives, poring over cold cases that had gathered dust for decades. Finally, I stumbled upon a series of unsolved murders from 1982. 3 victims, all from the same neighborhood, all killed in the same ritualistic manner, their bodies adorned with the same enigmatic symbols. The lead detective on the original case was Edward Blake, a name that had faded into obscurity along with the files. Tracking him down wasn't easy, but I eventually found him living alone in a dilapidated house on the outskirts of town. Blake greeted us with wary eyes. His once sturdy frame had withered, and his hands trembled ever so slightly as he gestured us inside. The walls were lined with yellowed newspapers and photographs, remnants of a past he couldn't leave behind. When we mentioned the recent murders, his face went ashen. "It's starting again," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "What is?" I pressed. He hesitated before pulling out an old notebook, its pages frayed and stained. "Back in '82, we thought we were chasing a killer, but it was more than that. The symbols, they're ancient, linked to old rituals, things best left forgotten." Joe exchanged a skeptical glance with me. "Are you saying this is some kind of cult?" Blake shook his head. "I don't know who or what is behind this, but those woods, there's something in them, something that watches." "Why wasn't this in the official reports?" I demanded. Would anyone have believed me? His eyes bore into mine, a mix of fear and resignation. I lost my partner in those woods. He went in one night chasing whispers. They never found his body. As we left, Blake grabbed my arm. "If you value your life, stay away from Pinecrest Woods." That night, sleep eluded me. The symbols danced behind my eyelids every time I closed them. Unable to rest, I found myself driving toward Pinecrest Lane, drawn by an inexplicable urge. The neighborhood was cloaked in darkness, the towering pines casting long, skeletal shadows across the road. Parking near Robert Eastman's house, I stepped out into the chilly air. A faint rustling echoed from the woods beyond, a sound too deliberate to be the wind. Gripping my flashlight, I approached the tree line. The whispers began softly, indistinct murmurings that seemed to emanate from the very air around me. My heart pounded as I pushed through the underbrush, the beam of light slicing through the oppressive darkness. Deeper in, I stumbled upon a clearing bathed in an otherworldly glow. At its center lay a circle of stones, each carved with the same symbols that had been cut into the victim's skin. The ground within the circle was freshly disturbed, a shallow pit yawning open like a gaping wound. As I stepped closer, the whispers intensified, resolving into discernible words in a language I didn't understand. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something metallic. Blood, perhaps. Suddenly, a figure flickered at the edge of my vision, a shadow that moved independently of any light source. I spun around, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. The flashlight flickered, and for a moment darkness swallowed everything. When the light returned, the clearing was empty. The whispers had ceased, leaving an eerie silence that pressed against my ears. The next day, I pored over texts on ancient symbology and folklore, seeking any reference to the markings and the circle of stones. One symbol recurred, a pine tree intertwined with an eye, associated with old legends about guardians of the forest, watchers who demanded offerings. Determined to get answers, I revisited Blake. His door swung open before I could knock. "You went into the woods, didn't you?" he said, eyes wide with fear. "I saw the clearing," I admitted. "What is it?" He ushered me inside, locking the door behind us. "It's a threshold," he whispered, "a place where the veil between worlds is thin. Those symbols are a summons, a ritual to awaken something ancient." "Why target these people?" I asked. Blake shook his head. "I don't know. Perhaps they were chosen, or perhaps they were simply vulnerable. The ones who live closest are the most at risk." Despite my report, the department dismissed my findings as the ramblings of a tired detective chasing shadows. Joe suggested I take some time off. "You're too close to this, Logan. Get some rest." But I couldn't let it go. That night, I returned to the woods, this time better prepared. Armed with a camera, recording equipment, and a determination to uncover the truth, I ventured back into the clearing. The air was colder than before, each breath forming a mist that lingered unnaturally long. The whispers returned, louder now, a chorus of voices speaking in unison. The symbols on the stones glowed faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. I raised my camera, snapping photos, but the images showed only darkness and blurred streaks of light. Frustrated, I set up the recorder. "Who are you?" I called into the void. "What do you want?" For a moment, there was silence. Then a single word echoed through the clearing, a guttural sound that resonated deep within my bones.
"Join."
A shadow materialized before me, humanoid but indistinct, its form shifting like smoke. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and crashing to the ground. The figure loomed over me, eyes like embers piercing the darkness. Scrambling to my feet, I fled, branches tearing at my clothes and skin as I tore through the underbrush. The whispers swelled into a cacophony, the voices angry now. Only when I burst onto the street did they cease, the sudden silence more terrifying than the noise. I tried to warn the department, but without evidence, my claims fell on deaf ears. The following morning, Joe was found dead in his home. The symbols carved into his flesh were different this time, cruder, hastier, but unmistakably the same language. Grief and guilt consumed me. If only I'd insisted he believe me, maybe he would still be alive. I retreated from the case, haunted by nightmares and the relentless whispers that now followed me everywhere. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, a package arrived, a worn book with no return address. Inside, I found pages detailing rituals and summoning ceremonies linked to ancient forest deities. Scrawled in the margin was a single note: "It's not over." I knew then that this was far from the end. The entity, or whatever it was, had marked me. The symbols, the whispers, the shadows, they were all closing in. The pines were no longer just trees. They were sentinels, watching, waiting. Now every night I hear the whispers growing louder, calling my name. I see shadows flickering at the edge of my vision, creeping closer each time. Sleep offers no respite, only vivid dreams of the clearing, the stones, and the abyss that lies beneath. I've become a prisoner of this unseen force, trapped between disbelief and the horrifying reality that something ancient and malevolent has awakened in those woods. And I fear that soon, I too will become one of its offerings. Sometimes in the darkest hours before dawn, I find myself standing at the edge of Pinecrest Woods, the pines towering above like silent guardians. The whispers beckon, weaving through the branches, pulling me toward the inevitable. And I know that one day I won't be able to resist the call of the whispers in the pines. Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more chills to come. And remember, the best advice can sometimes be the difference between light and dark. So, share yours in the comments before the night gets any darker. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes open.